And what we're really going to talk about here is a broad subject, really, with a lot of ramifications. And that is the way that content is, the relationship between the consumer of content and the content itself is increasingly shifting. Okay. Anyway, so we're talking about how the content experience is increasingly under the control of the consumer, and that has a lot of implications both for the content creators and the media industry broadly, and the marketing piece of the industry, and how advertisement is going to be perceived and understood. So it's a really interesting group of people, quite diverse up here. We have to discuss this. All of you probably, many of you just heard Tom Glocer, the CEO of Thomson Reuters, on this panel upstairs a few minutes ago. Next to him is Nick Bilton from the New York Times. What's your exact title, Nick?
I have a new role. I used to be in the research and development labs, but now I'm the lead technology writer for the Bits blog.
Oh, that's good. But you know, the thing about the New York Times that a lot of people don't realize is, unlike almost any other newspaper I can think of, they actually have an R&D lab that researches what to do about technology and the kind of things that Tom was talking about before and how media is changing. And you used to be there. Now you're a journalist. He's also got a book coming out. What's the title of the book?
The book's called I Live in the Future, and it's in the research and development labs. We really tried to look 2 to 10 years out. We tried to look around corners. We were talking about mobile devices and e-readers, a few years ago, and the book's really based on some of those concepts and a lot of neuroscience about how our brains are changing when we read content on devices versus paper. So it's called I Live in the Future.
Interesting. Good. Well, we'll probably get to some relevant stuff there as we go on in this discussion. I want to pronounce it right. Tero Ojanperä? Is that close?
Pretty good, yeah.
Pretty good? Okay. Give us your title, Tero. He's at Nokia, but I want his title. I'm not prepared enough. Go ahead.
Yeah, I used to be also in the research, so I was the CTO, but now I have moved to the media, so I'm called Chief Entertainment Officer.
Yeah, and in fact, he just came from Sundance to come here. So that's a good job at Nokia, probably.
But working with the Nokia's OVI initiative, maps, apps, music media for your phone.
Good.
Worldwide.
All right.
Are you giving any tours tonight? Tours? Entertainment?
Yeah, we can. If we agree on the price, of course.
Right. Thank you. So next to him, comedian Dave Moore with 24/7 Media, which is a, well, you explain what it is. It's a big part of WPP, which was not too long ago acquired.
Yes, we're an internet advertising and technology company.
Great. Finally, Carlos Bhola of Kickin', which probably most of you haven't heard much about. And what he talks about tonight is going to be kind of the first time that he's ever talked in public about his new startup. So his company has a lot of relevance to this discussion. So, Tero, I wanted to start with you, because mobile is a big piece of what we're talking about here. And Nokia, sort of means mobile to all of us. And so when you hear about the idea of user-centric media and how the nature of media consumption is shifting, how do you interpret that? What does it mean, and how is what's happening at Nokia indicative of where things are headed?
Yeah, when I think about the user centricity, I start from the kind of relevancy and trust. So when you think about, I'm thinking about now we are in the DLD, I think about content specifically, that if we are now transforming the mobile to become the distribution vehicle for content or interaction vehicle for content, so what you get needs to be relevant for you, and you need to be able to trust that one. And trust emerges. Trust, of course, it's a relevant thing. It's a relevant thing in a way that depending what do you believe, you trust different things. But that's the first point. The second that is related, that we think that the big transformation is happening, is that it's a little bit like instead of the what are you doing, the where is becoming more important. We have used the word social location. So as an example, last week we announced that, hey, we will provide now free navigation for every Nokia smartphone that has a GPS chip, which is going to be many, worldwide, 74 countries, I think, 49 languages, etc. What's the big point there? I think the point is that now it is possible to build location-relevant apps in a much easier way and provide content that is relevant, so it's related again to the point. So that's how I kind of think about the third point I would like to make, as an opening, because we are in the conference that has a lot of media and publishers. We think that in order for you to get relevant content, we need to simplify the publishing chain. So how do you get your content into mobile in a very easier than today? Many people like to build apps, but many people don't. So how can we simplify that? You press a button and you get your content delivered around the world, locally relevant to the people who actually decide to get it. So that's what we are working on and making it happen. And so those are like, I think it comes back to always to the, how do we make relevant content, whether it is global or local, and find the partners to work in that context.
But is that, in that architecture, is Nokia going to be actually creating content or just serving as a conduit for the content made by others?
Yeah, the latter one. So we don't have any plans. We are really working with partners and enabling them to get wider reach for their content around the world.
Forgive the terminology, but it's sort of like Apple and Google's approach to mobile platforms in that sense. Not that you weren't there first, of course, but I'm just trying to clarify how to think about it in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think in some ways where I come back to that sort of what is the kind of, how do you describe Nokia? I think I would describe us one of the most global companies of the world, but also one of the most local companies. So I think we are approaching this from the angle that how can we serve the people where they are in a given moment, whether it is like you have a geographical area which is meaningful to you. You might be in your home village, you want to get the local news, we'll bring it to you. But local news today, there is no place to go how to distribute the mobile, or we will be that place, and partly already is. And in that respect, and the other thing is that starting from the angle that, hey, we have the distribution vehicle, which is the mobile, that is becoming more context sensitive, and that creates value, and it makes it more relevant for the end user.
Okay, good. One thing I like about this panel is we really have representatives from a lot of pieces of the industry. So here we have a device company moving toward helping consumers get content more efficiently. And now, Dave, you're in the ad industry. To what extent did what Tero said sound right to you, and how does this affect advertising in a big picture way?
Well, I think what he said, which really resonates, is relevance for the consumer. And to the extent that relevance is really targeted for both ordinary content as well as advertising, it starts becoming important information. And certainly with the cell phone, it is an incredible device. It's more prevalent than computers right now. It certainly should be the media device of the future. We're all waiting for the inflection point for it, and maybe it's this year, but it will be there. It's just a question of when. And the ability to provide localized content to the consumer that is subject to their desire to want that content, I think is going to be a very, very powerful way to market products and serve the consumer.
So is that like another way of saying that the ads become like content and the consumer really wants to see the ads that they get because they're so relevant to them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying that when an ad is precisely targeted, it ceases to become an ad and becomes useful information.
Would you say that's happened yet, or are we still kind of far from that?
Well, you know, it
horizon?
happened to me last Valentine's Day. I mean, I typically buy my wife a dozen roses for Valentine's Day, and she gives me a little peck on the cheek, and, you know, that a boy. But last year, I got an email, and it listed all these new, unique gifts that I could get for Valentine's Day, and I thought, what the hell, I'm going to try one of these. I ordered it, and when I gave it to her, I got a big kiss on the lips. So from my perspective, you know, that stuff works.
All right, that's a real focus group right there. Tom, giant media company, mostly in the business content business. How does this user centricity thinking affect what you do?
Well, first I was thinking that email to Dave came from his wife, so I know why you got a big kiss.
And it was relevant, I can tell you.
Absolutely. You know, I think there's nothing particularly new invented under the sun. We just are constantly finding new ways to make relevant the things we need either for entertainment or to do our job. Our business is shifted mostly onto the do your job side, but I think it's just as relevant, all of these things, to the entertainment and generally staying informed about the world. So what we think of is the following. First generation of, say, mobile devices, since we're on mobile, everyone was sort of taking a bunch of 10-foot or 3-foot experiences and saying, gee, how cool, I can watch TV on my phone. But if I'm sitting with an enormous LED screen, or maybe even one of those new 3D screens upstairs, I'm not going to watch TV on my Nokia phone. Not that Tero doesn't make fantastic devices, but he's not going to watch it on his phone either. He wants to watch it on the full screen. And so the question ends up being, have we really thought through what sort of content do people want when they're mobile? And what should the experience be? So I'll give you an example of something in our labs. We're toying around with, in our legal business, which is very sophisticated from a sort of back-end technology standpoint, we're playing around with location-specific services on mobile delivery. So if you open up, I don't care whether it's your iPhone or your Nokia N90 series, and we know where you are, and you put in court rules, if we know you're standing at 60 Center Street in New York in front of the court, we're going to pop on top the New York City court rules. And then below, we're going to say, we thought you probably wanted the New York rules because you're standing right in front of New York court. If this just happens to be your office and you're out for a coffee break and you really want California, click here, move away. And so when you start thinking through where is the person and where are they in their daily work when they encounter your content, you think about it in a different way. Final example, if you're reading cases, yeah, you can read, and I can show you on my iPhone how to search and get all the case law you want. And maybe if I'm really stuck, I'll do that someday. But actually, what I want mobile is not to read a 100-page legal authority. What I would love and do get now is an update to say, by the way, that 7 hours of legal research you did last night, there's a new case that came out on your way into court to argue a case that's overruled it. And would you like us to fax you that opinion to your hotel? That's what I want mobile. And so I think the rule on user centricity is, and it's tougher in the consumer world because we're all wonderfully weird and heterogeneous. In the professional world, if you understand deeply enough the sequences by which people go through their work routines, you can design far better product for them.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Nick, so just to risk broadening this discussion too much, but being a journalist, I'm fascinated to hear your perspective on the question of how it sort of changes media a little bit. In other words, it's often been said that as the consumer gets more control and basically can read a blog just as quickly or as easily or maybe more easily than they can read the New York Times, especially if the New York Times is charging money, by the way, which it's now said it's going to do, that will hurt.
The blogs will be free.
What?
I think the blogs
will be free. Ah, thanks.
So we're all good.
So you'll still be getting paid whatever you get paid. But is it going to hurt the New York Times and big media, consumer media, that we have all this choice? Or is there a way that all flowers can bloom and revenue streams may somehow continue, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think okay, so what if these big newspapers get hurt? I mean, I think they've been incredibly too big in the past. Some of these newsrooms across the country, across the world, are 1,000 people, 1,500 people, and people have never had a voice in what the discussion has been. And I think that what's happening now is we all have the same megaphone, right? We're all able to contribute and be a part of the discussion. And if a blog breaks a news story quicker than the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, then people should go there to read it. And I don't think we should differentiate between that. When you look at how this plays into user-centric content, I think what you're going to see happening is that, like you were talking about with location-based services, being able to tell you new stories based on your location, you're also going to start to get content that's changed based on who you're friends with on your social network. And one of the things that we're seeing happening is if you look at the traffic on Twitter, 25% almost is links being shared. So the other 75% is people talking about hamburgers and going to the toilet and things like that. But there's 25% of these millions and millions of tweets sent every day that are links. And if you start to cross-correlate that with where you're located and your interests in the sites that you've been to, you get to, and the device you're on even. If I'm in a 1 foot, 2 foot, 10 foot experience, you start to give a really amazing experience based around that.
Does that suggest that the New York Times labs ought to start working with Bitly then?
Well, the New York Times has been working with some of these URL shortening services, and in the labs, when I was in the labs, we actually prototyped experiences like this, and one of them was we put an RFID chip in our phones and an RFID reader on our computer, and so we knew when you were at your desk. So if you were reading an article at the New York Times and you got halfway through and you picked up your phone and you walked away, it would send the rest of the article to your phone. And then you walk into your living room and your living room says, hey, we know you were reading that article. Here's some videos that are associated with that. And it would pull those up automatically. And then it would tell you.
Microsoft has had a lot of work in that arena too, where they've tried to do that.
Yeah, and it's these three screens that are really taking over our lives, and the content is flowing between that. And the next iteration of that is really looking at how our social networks play into this content and this delivery mechanism.
Interesting. So Carlos, you have a company which I think, in your opinion, exemplifies all of this. So tell us quickly about what it's all about.
So there'll be some images on the screen that you guys can look at as I go through this. So we really thought an awful lot about this real issue, and I want to pick up on a comment that Tom made on the previous panel, which is we fundamentally believe that the internet is going through a transformation. The first 15 to 20 years of it was really about wallowing around in the technology and in some of the distribution aspects of the medium. The next phase of transition, which is normal in any industry evolution, is really going to revolve around behavioral patterns, consumer or professional behavioral patterns, depending on your moment of truth or your intent. And as soon as you start to think about behavioral patterns, you've got to think about the user. And as it turns out, what we're all about at this point is trying to put user back in user centricity. So if you look at users, as it turns out, how they consume content on the internet, turns out about 3% of all consumption happens in search, but it accounts for about 50% of monetization. Interestingly enough, that 3% is actually 98% of the gateway to the other 97%, as it turns out. And that number is luckily dropping, and it gets really extreme in the long tail of content. So if you're the New York Times, you get great traffic coming directly to you. If you're CNN, you get some great traffic coming to you, but you're still paying for an awful lot of traffic. Turns out, if you look at it from a user standpoint, users only have 3 things that they care about, as it turns out. Number 1, my favorites. What are my favorite sites? Facebook probably exemplifies this better than any other site that's out there. Affiliations trump pushed services. That's just a fact. If I have an affiliation for either my friend's blog or for CNN, that will trump the Wisconsin Herald Tribune appearing number 1 in a Google News search. That's just what we're seeing right now. So favorites are very important. The second thing that we see users really caring an awful lot about are what we call surprises or wow moments. Even within their favorite sites and their favorite sources from their favorite people and friends, they sometimes don't even understand how much content there is there that's relevant to what they're doing. So if I'm buying a Nikon D7000 camera, I care about what David Sifry tells me an awful lot more potentially than what Wikipedia has or CNET has, as an example. So wow moments, surprises as it pertains to my intent is very important. And the last thing that we see is sharing is very important. Ask and tell, unlocking that content. And so for us, user centricity really revolves, the value proposition really revolves around that. My web, always with me, and not service push and service centricity. Very similar to some of the precepts that Facebook, I think, has started to scratch the surface of. And I think it plays out in exactly what I just said, which is when I'm on Amazon, I also want to know what is in my iTunes profile so I don't buy the same stuff twice, as an example. Or while I'm on Amazon, I might choose to buy the song from iTunes if that's what my buying mechanism is. And those things should be mushed up. If I like Nokia OV Maps, which we've just integrated, to go with my Google search, I should be able to have that. And so that's precisely our view. User centricity, on-the-fly, personalized navigation.
So for you, user centricity is really sort of trying to disregard what you would call maybe false barriers between services and giving the user more of an integrated experience of all the services they prefer to look at at one time.
Absolutely, that's part of it. I think you have to go back to intent. If you look at, and Google, they don't publish these statistics too much, but if Google were to publish statistics about what I call find versus discovery, discovery is jumping into the Pacific Ocean of knowledge and finding some arcane detail about Greek mythology. That's great, and we do an awful lot of that. And the first little while we were playing with the internet, we jumped into that Pacific Ocean of crap, and we wallowed around. And now increasingly what happens is there are a whole bunch of find experiences that I'm trying to get to a lot of times. And find is typically a targeted requirement. And so as we see that bifurcation, what's happening is more and more and more and more find is becoming very relevant. So number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 15 search result, you're seeing a completely different curve than when we started out. So that's the first key element. The second key element is, if I may, a mashup or presentation logic from multiple sources. There is a presentation logic. It is in your browser. It's in these tabs. But imagine if I were to search for Darjeeling Limited, a movie, right? And my trusted sources are iTunes, YouTube, Amazon, eBay, Wikipedia, IMDb, right? Right now, for me to get simultaneously my favorites, wow moments, or sharing around that content, I'd have to go open each tab, go to each service provider, type that in, do the search, and then come back. Do you understand how long that's going to take me? What about if I had some client intelligence that actually allows me to get that instantaneously? That's what Kickin' is about. And you should all try it, by the way. It's awesome. I quit my investment job to do this thing. So it's that great.
Thank you, Carlos. So, Tero, you were nodding over there. All right. You had some impact there. How would that kind of thing, whether it's Kickin' or is that kind of experience something where you think we're headed in the mobile arena, and even on the smallest of the screens that we use?
Yeah, I think what resonated to me, what Carlos said, is really this that what are the things you trust, and how will that influence? So if you want to get your content from a certain source, or you're going to go and buy your things from a certain source, that needs to be respected. So it comes back to this that what you actually decide what are your choices, and how do we actually embed that into the process. So today, I think what is the primary, if you do a search today, you get a blue list of links, actually a machine deciding for you what's relevant. And I think that we need to insert more of the human touch. You earlier asked that what's the difference between the different approaches. I think there is a machine approach and there is a more human approach that trust is the individuals actually be embedded in the process. And I think that's what actually, if I understood all Carlos said, but I think that's really in the core of what he's doing.
In other words, the individual has the control themselves. You're saying that human touch, not the human touch of an editor or something else, or could it be both?
They can also have human touch, but I think that I was talking about the individual, that they actually are in the control of the process, part of the creating the trust that I have to say in what is being served to me. And I think that if I have a certain brands that I trust, whether they are global brands like Reuters, or whether they are local brands like my home village newspaper that is important for my mother. So I think that this you need to have a say in the process what is being searched for.
Did you?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that there's a balance between the editor and your friends, right? And one of the things that I'm writing about in the book is called trust markets, and how we develop, like, all of the people I follow on Twitter to share links are in my trust market, and that there's an ebb and flow that goes through within that. But if you look at studies from Pew Research and Forrester Research and so on, we trust our friends and families on average 90%, and we trust organizations on less than 40%.
Well, that's a point that makes even more sense applied to Facebook than to Twitter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And David, if I could just touch on that and clarify a point, I actually think it definitely is both. It all depends on what you're trying to do and what's the general weight of those. I think the publishers do have a role in this. In fact, when we talk to our publishing partners, the New York Times, Reuters, CNN, we actually talk to them about unlocking their content, because they are held hostage to 256 characters in a blue link. That's not content consumption, last time I checked. I mean, so what if you can get CNN in Google or in Bing or in Yahoo, if that's your trusted source? So I think it's both. I think publishers understand the intent of their content. Publishers have those affiliations, and publishers are looking for revenue. And quite frankly, it's readily available.
Yeah.
And it's up to the consumer.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's, I wish Carlos had a little more passion for his business.
I know, it's really disappointing. He's so lifeless over
But
there.
it's interesting today because in the advertising panel, marketing panel, they talked about don't listen to the user. Did you hear that segment?
No, I missed that.
Yeah.
What do they
said,
mean by that?
Don't listen to the user. That if you have a message for your product or service, that you need to develop that on your own and then bring it to them. And I thought that was very unusual to hear at a conference like this.
Yeah, that's actually, if I may, I think that's a very interesting viewpoint because I think it's all about consumer choice. Just to give an example about, hey, how can actually like the thing that you know the location simplify your life? I have 3 kids. I'm heading to a holiday, and I have been driving like a couple of hours. So my phone actually knows that I have been driving a couple of hours, and there's still 3 hours to go. So if I'm going by car to Vermont, as an example. So actually, it alerts me after 1 hour, there is a location point advertising that, hey, up and coming is a service station, and they have a coupon that gives you, the electronic coupon that gives you actually discount. So I know that, okay,
And you're holding your phone while you're driving like this to see that? Or?
It's in the car holder,
Oh,
and
it's
of
in
course
okay, fine. Oh.
So, as you do. So in a point being that in that context, knowing that I can stuff the hamburgers to the 3 kids in half an hour before they actually start to cry in the back seat is very important information.
Yeah,
so I think that, and then it's
Absolutely.
not advertising, but it's actually a relevant information.
Well, the issue, I have to mention the subject of Google because, if one of the things that has made them so successful is the intrinsic user centricity of the search process. And that's why people in advertising and elsewhere talk about Google being like reading your mind, because when you type a search query in, you are expressing what's in your head, whereas virtually every other advertising form online is trying to guess what you might have in your head given other things that are being observed or that you might have said. And it's impossible to ever be as exact as Google can be in responding to you, one would presume. Did you have a thought on that?
2 thoughts. I guess one, it's really hard to do in the great consumer world because there are so many different contexts in which you're asking for the information. It becomes somewhat easier as you go more vertically into work capacity. We do it by essentially storing every single keystroke and every single query in our professional databases. And we know what you're interested in because we know what millions of people before you have wanted when you followed a particular sequence.
Do you know what I, as your customer, has done every keystroke that I did so that you can anticipate, well, 90% of the time after you did these 3 things, you did this 4th thing. Is that something you have in your database?
Yeah, well, we anonymize it, right? So we protect privacy. But for example, if you get a bunch of authorities, take a hyperlink, go away, and come back, we'll give that a higher relevancy ranking because we think you cared more about it. If you hit the print button, we'll give it an even higher relevancy rating because you've gone to the act of going to paper with it rather than staying purely electronic. And then we'll essentially aggregate that across 1 million searches a day, in this case in our legal business, and suggest to you essentially like the Amazon suggestion engine, but much more finely tuned because it's within professionals looking for things rather than just, I happen to like Herbie Hancock and Sibelius, and that's hard to make that link in consumer world. The other thing I just wanted to pitch in here, because I thought you were going that way, is I wouldn't rule out the value of good old-fashioned human editing.
Yeah.
These days, we have a tendency to sort of reinvent with a new name, in this case, curation. What are all those lists on Twitter, right? Well, I've got a curated list of sites. That's what great editors have been doing for a long time. You should read the following 10 books, or you should look at the following 10 blog sites. And the human serendipity that a great editor brings, who really knows her audience and can say, I'm bringing you something that you won't find. The most brilliantly tuned engine will not anticipate this clearly creative 4th choice.
Marissa Mayer of Google calls it the veggies. you know, the things you have to have, and the things that, you know, you have the things that suggested to you, but the veggies, they're the things that you have to have, essentially. The thing that I think is interesting about what you were just saying about these analytics that you're doing and pushing things higher, and we've done a lot of this in the R&D labs. One of the problems I think that comes up, though, is in program, it's called the cold start problem. So if I go to Reuters and I look at all these business stories, and then I go to the New York Times for the first time, it doesn't know that I've seen all these business stories. You know, if I go to Amazon and I purchase something and then I go to Barnes & Noble, it doesn't know that I like business books. And I wonder when we're going to get to a point where people are actually going to start to share this data and for the user, not in a creepy, like we're watching what you're doing way, but more for the user to be able to deliver the best experience for them.
Hey, Nick, that's precisely what we're doing at Kickin'. That's exactly what we're doing at Kickin'.
Can you give me $20 for asking that?
Thank you so much. I owe you $20.
You got to let him in your beta, Carlos.
I can't believe he got to every one of the panelists on this. I mean, it's...
Speaking of getting, I want to get to you guys, because I've been moderating all day. I'm sick of asking questions, so you guys should come up with some thoughts and questions out there, too. No, that really cut everybody off, didn't it? What?
I was going to add just, I think, just a note on the, because we are discussing here kind of how I look at this from the two angles. One is the discovery. How do I find the things that I'm interested in or I want to be delivered? So that's like, of course, we discussed that, I think, by the way, that putting your intent into the box and getting a list is not the way how we ultimately want to consume content. And that's actually what Carlos was talking about. We need to actually simplify the way how we consume content. I'm coming from the sort of mobile angle where we are seeing that, hey, discovering things is going to move from the screen into the real environment. So you go along, you tag environment, you can discover tags, and that actually can trigger like streaming from your phone, or can trigger that. As an example, we did an experiment with the NFC, which is sort of the near-field communication, that when you touch a tag, it actually initiates an action. We noticed that actually tripled the conversion rate that people actually used mobile services, because they can go to a poster and they can actually touch it, kind of bring the phone to close, and something happens. It brings in a menu, it can start the stream, or you can alert that, hey, also your friend went to this movie. So that's the discovery problem is one. The second one is, and we are doing kind of the social location, new ways of sort of the interacting with your phone is the critical piece here. Tim Kring described yesterday actually the project we are doing in gaming and storytelling that is applying a lot of these things. Then the other problem we are trying to solve is that how to bring the content into new distribution kind of vehicle, which the phone is, in this case it is. And that's kind of where we run into the problem that, hey, publishers want to publish their content in the wide audience, and you want to bring it into in a relevant form. So we are building a system that enables you to put your content. You don't necessarily build an app, but you can actually can come an app if you so wish, or if you want that it's on a web, or if it goes to the web, that's what we can do. So that's what Ovi, if you think about the broad terms, is simplify the discovery and then enable the intake of the content, publishing of the content in a very seamless way.
But I can't avoid going back to something Nick was talking about when he mentioned Twitter.
Thank
you.
Just kidding.
What?
I just tried to crack a joke. It was really bad.
Oh,
just ignore me.
I missed it. But anyway, it's late, like I said. But you were talking about Twitter as, 25%. Wait, what did you say?
25% of Twitter is links.
Yeah, right. Well, so that's what I like Twitter for, frankly. And I wish, as a Facebook user and book author, I wish people used Facebook that way more than they do. Although the most interesting way to use Facebook, I find, is to use the links filter on the left side of Facebook, which turns Facebook into something much more like Twitter in the sense that it's all the links that your friends have put up, whether it's a video or articles or whatever. But then you can take that even further, like what the Huffington Post has been doing with what they call social news, through a very deep integration with Facebook Connect, where basically you make everything you see in that part of Huffington Post is what your friends have said about the articles that you're reading. And it becomes a very interactive experience with the people who you've already declared to be your friends on Facebook. So that is a real curation by the people you really care about. That's one of the most sophisticated ones that's happening anywhere.
Well, the thing it's interesting about the Facebook-Twitter divide when it comes to content, with Twitter, you decide who you're going to follow. You decide who those people are that are going to share those links. With Facebook, you have to friend your mom. You have to friend your sister, and they're going to share links about puppies and weird things that you don't really care about. And I think that's why Twitter has become
yourself, right.
exactly. Sorry. And I think that's why Twitter has become the central point for a lot of us to consume content. And it's going to be interesting, and maybe you'll know more about this, but it's going to be interesting to see how Facebook solves that problem. Because I have to friend my coworkers. I have to friend all these people on Facebook. On Twitter, I get to decide who it is I bring into my curation feed.
Well, in reality,
David, you know, it sounded to me, though, when you described all that, you have too much time on your hands.
what?
I mean, reading all that stuff. I mean, it
No, but he's
just,
doing
you
it
know,
too.
from
Don't blame
Twitter
this
and Facebook and everything else, when do you have time to have fun?
No, but you only have to read the articles your friends have already told you are interesting. It actually saves time, I think.
Yeah, but do you write reviews for your friends, too?
Yeah, in effect, I do, because, I mean, in a way, we're all serving as editors. I put up quite a few links on both Twitter and Facebook, and I think I'm doing a service for my friends when I do that, and
this
they
is
often follow those links.
This is kind of your career, too, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, and
But
journalists...
it's nothing about your career. I just wrote an article called Controlled Serendipity about how everyone is now a curator of content. Every single person. I mean, from if you look at some of the URL shortening services, they're seeing 30-40% of links being shared by Twitter. They're seeing 30-40% by Facebook, and the rest is email. Everybody is curating content to a certain degree. And
Well, I guess if you send an email on an FYI basis, you are sharing it. But I would say, what percentage of the population is doing what you just talked about, and what percentage do you think is going to do it in the future?
Well, I mean, I'll take my wife for a perfect example. She is not a geek. She's not into technology. I tried to get her on Twitter, and she was just not interested, and she's a pastry chef. And all of a sudden, she found out that some pastry cooks were on Twitter, and now all she does is go to Twitter, and she pulls all of her content through there. And she found the hook that worked for her for these social networks. And she shares interesting articles with them, and they share them back with her.
Yeah, but I think in some respect that is the medium is changing, but the behaviors are very much similar than they have always been. Yeah. Of course, and in that sense, curation has happened always, and everybody has been in some ways curator. And
Wait, how? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean that if I'm being told 10 stories, I think about which were good one, and when I pass them over, I tell only maybe the best one. So I curated actually those stories. So in that way, I feel that behaviors are very much similar. We are just finding a new and better ways to actually connect people, and in this way making them do things faster or better, more efficiently. And I think that's what's great about the technology.
But do you ever give restaurant recommendations to people?
Yes.
So perfect example is Foursquare, right? It's a mobile application that a lot of people are using, and you can check in somewhere, and then you can leave a tip. And it's changed the way I go to restaurants and bars in New York City. And when I go somewhere, my wife and I are like, let's check in and see what people recommend. And it's people sharing content.
I guess my point is that all this stuff is taking up so much time. I mean,
No, but it saves time. It saved him time.
Well, but I got to tell you, you're constantly looking for the new thing, the new filter, and everything else.
Your friends are filtering it to you. You're not looking for
You know,
anything.
for my behavior, that's why I love user centricity, right? Because I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to take the content that I like. I want to see that all the time. But, it seems to me that a lot of what we've been doing here is just looking for new ways to talk to one another, and that's not a bad thing, is it?
No, but it is like that.
I was going to say that we are going to hug with Carlos here, because she provides the way of. I provide the relevancy, and he provides the sort of the way of consuming content in an easy way. So you are good to go.
No idea.
If you need only one story a day, we will provide it for you.
Right.
But
That's all he wants. That's all he can handle.
Just one good story. Just one good one.
And based on your hesitation, we are not going to take the restaurant recommendation from you.
But I think you got to be really careful with this word curation. I mean, if you're going to play in the user-centric word, you have to understand the ultimate end curation happens by the user. But curation actually starts from the author, whether it's a journalist, whether it's the editor that actually forms these things into something, whether it's user-generated content, a la Facebook, a la Twitter, etc. So you need to understand that there's a spectrum of curation that happens. The amount of curation you're interested in, as it turns out, is not driven by anything else but what you're doing and how much time you have to do it, which is precisely Dave's point. So intent is a very big driver, not only of the content you're consuming, but the degree of curation that you need. The good news, Dave, is when we bring you content via Kick-In, you actually have an awful lot more time on your hands. You know why? You don't have to click and jump around to all these sites. It's all there. You can consume it right there, and especially if it comes on a mobile phone for you, because it's also relevant to the screen size and your location. But I think what's a hard question is if curation is needed throughout the spectrum, for the people that are going to be doing curation or publishing, if I may, how are they going to make money? At the end of the day, there's a huge financial underpinning question here.
Time's up, right?
What?
Time's up, right? After making money?
And that's
My jokes aren't working.
No, I don't get your
on a
jokes.
serious
I'm
note,
just really, I'm really tired.
It's
Sorry.
maybe too late.
No, but you know, when you look at search and tailored content, most of the money is being made through e-commerce. I mean, if you look at a search engine, well, I forget exactly the number, but it's somewhere in 65, 70% of all the money that Google's making is e-commerce.
Yeah, but here's but getting to the money issue, that's also something that we spent a fair bit of time on. And we actually had this insight that Dave suggested earlier, which is content. The way we discern amongst content, you can actually do the same for advertising. If you treat advertising like content, and you also overlay behavioral mapping, very much like Dakota had tried, and some of the things you guys are doing at WPP, Dave, turns out you can actually curate advertising. You can curate business models. Tom is in the business of having subscriptions. If you look at subscriptions, they're just all the time paid. You can do one-off payments. If you allow for where and how users are consuming content, if you allow not only for the bleed-through of the relevant content, whether it's favorites or wow moments, but you actually bleed through the monetization logic at the same time, guess what? You end up with an ecosystem that works. So why is it in search, whether it's Google, Bing, or Yahoo, right? Why is it me as a publisher, I have to effectively buy banners or buy paid listings? Why is it I can't bleed my ad through with my content in that at that consumption point? That's precisely what we're doing at Kick-In. Why is it when I'm on Amazon, if before I buy the N7000, I would want to do a Bing search, something that we are doing at Kick-In, why is it I can't show up with some ads from Bing overlaid in that experience? Why can't that all be mashed up? So I think we've got to think about curation as a spectrum, but what goes with curation is the cost of curation and business models that go with curation. And I think we've got to also be mature about that.
Yeah, I think Carlos made a good point about this. The current model is very much that I buy banners, I buy advertising in a way that I'm trying to actually achieve something, so which is not advertising. I'm trying to make people to actually come to consume my content, so let's make it easier. They might want to go to the restaurants, so we'll actually hook you up, guide you there, etc. So we need to think more about that. What is the intent of the final intent? What do you actually meant when you said something, and how do we help people to achieve that one?
Absolutely.
Okay, we have an audience member.
Is this on?
Identify yourself.
My name is Mike Anderson. Can you hear me? Is
Yeah.
it on?
Yeah.
I'm large. I'm Scottish. I have a background mainly in newspapers. And there's a couple of things, some very relevant points you made about the role of the editor. And the other thing that's quite interesting listening to you all is there's a couple of things that worry me about digital is that they believe digital in itself is the only solution, and the role it plays with other media, it sometimes forgets. And when you need content to drive activity, whether you're printing it or you're broadcasting it or you're in a digital space, you've got to get the content makers, if you like, the journalists or the sports producers, to understand the role each of the channels play, right? And what we did in our organization is got ourselves to a place where we said, okay, we have a newspaper, we have a website, and we have mobile. And then to get everybody in the organization comfortable, but that all those things are good things, we came up with a crystallization, which was Newspaper is best off. Internet is more off. Mobile is instant. Okay? So when everybody gets sort of organized around the roles each of those channels were playing, there was a question about how do you make money? Okay, so we then took a property which was a fantasy football game, soccer game that we run, the largest paid-for soccer game in the world as a fantasy game. Okay, so here's how you make money. Okay, in the newspaper you have 48 pages a day of soccer insight reports and all the details. Okay, you go to the web where you can get real depth, real stats, historical information, and you pay for that. And then you go to your mobile phone and you can actually see the goal that's been scored by the player who's in your team. And in that way, kind of everybody felt suddenly, by having that example in the organization, that actually all platforms are good and you can make money. It's not about, you don't do this because we're going to lose money doing that.
Did you do this with the print paper to try to keep people on the print paper? I mean, what was the...
We wanted to, frankly, grow our audience on all three platforms. If we end up with an aggregation, which is more people consuming our content, whichever channel they've chosen, then we've got something going on. Actually, what was happening with the paper and the internet and mobile was our audience was growing, it was getting younger, and it was getting wealthier. So if I'm a media brand and I've got younger, growing, wealthier audience, I'm in pretty good shape. So, but the point I was wanting to make about the crystallization of the role you play for the people who are making the content is quite important. And what's interesting, listening to you gets quite confusing as to what's going on in mobile, what we're doing with the internet. We've got all these different things we can do, but it's not clear the role the channel is playing if you are the content producer. And that's something that I don't hear a lot of.
I think as consumers, there's no concept between channels. It's just content.
Yeah.
You know, there's literally no concept and differentiation between content I consume on my mobile phone, on a print newspaper, on the radio. It's just content. It doesn't matter who it comes from. It's just.
But in that soccer example, all I want to do is give them a, 20-second clip of somebody scoring a goal or a player in their team, penalty or something, a little bit of instant action to a mobile device. It's instant. That's all you want. Yeah. That's all he needs. He doesn't need to hear all the other stuff.
I think the point you're making a good point about that. Hey, it's very confusing because in some ways it is. There are so many new mediums and ways of discover. But I think if you try to kind of jump into a roof and observe the world from there, it is confusing. But I think that's why we need to look from the consumer's angle, that what do they want, and that's you need to understand your customer.
Yes.
That's the first point. And then if I look then at the content or publishers in as a broad scope, many actually are struggling that, okay, how to approach the medium. So the question is that how can we help and simplify the publisher's life in reaching their customer? And there are a lot of tools that we are working on. We'll make that happen, but I think it's a more generic problem.
I would just make a comment before we go to the next question. One of the reasons why Tero, I would assume, is optimistic long term is the mobile device, which is with us all the time, as technology's pace continues to advance and the processing power that's on there becomes greater and greater and greater, inevitably becomes the nexus of all this stuff. Because I'm sure, for example, what's going to happen, and it probably won't be that far down the road, you have a device, it's on all the time. Not only will it know what you're keying into it, it will basically know what TV you're watching, what movie you saw, what street you walked down. Of course, it already knows that. And pretty soon, it's going to trump all that other stuff because, it will say, well, you watched that TV show last night, and, so therefore it's got a new episode just for you because you're now walking down. I mean, the processing capabilities will be phenomenal, and that's going to change. I think, maybe it'll also lead to ability to project the data that's here, I'm sure it will, onto a larger screen, but it's all going to center on something that's on your person, I would say. You agree with that?
It's for news, too. I mean, we've done a lot of research around this in the R&D labs, and And imagine if your phone knows that you live in Brooklyn because you're there at night between X time and X time, and there's a shooting that happens, and you get a news alert from that. I mean, your phone is going to be the central hub for everything.
I mean, even it probably will listen to the conversations you're having with other people and make comments and suggestions based on that, for that matter.
So
I'm not joking about that, by the way.
Here's a live example, right, about, and to me it's just an issue of producers of content should be device neutral and should let the users choose how to encounter the content or service. So last night, I had to catch a relatively early Lufthansa flight to be here in Munich. The New York Jets, for those of you from New York, haven't been in a championship game in 40 years, and I find myself sitting on the plane before it's about to taxi out. So I happen to have a sling box installed, which is a place-shifting device for your television. First, I try and get it.
Your typical CEO with a sling box. But
Right.
anyway, go.
First, I try and get it on my iPhone, which it doesn't go over 3G onto the iPhone. You have to have a Wi-Fi connection. Another story. I pop in a 3G into my laptop, and I'm watching the game sitting on Lufthansa until they make me shut it down. Huge extra enjoyment for me. I get to almost watch the end of the game. And this is just, eventually, as you say, it's going to be easily available onto multiple devices for me. And
There's a question out there.
Yeah, no, we're going to get to it. I'm sorry. But it's
I was
interesting. Claudia, we're not trying to leave you out, but go ahead. You ask your question. We only have a minute left, so we want to hear it.
No, actually, like representing the user here. So with everything, you have made a case about how much are you going to know about me and how beneficial is that going to be. But what is the downside there? Should I be scared of everything you're going to know about me? And can you actually, I'm sure you're conscious about like the risks and the dangers of, like having users naked. Probably it would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think
that came up in the one upstairs about the Google and the facial recognition too.
That's a great point. But before that, actually, I wanted to give advice to Tom that there's a better way of doing that. If you would have had your Nokia phone, you could have, of course, downloaded, whether it's over Wi-Fi or 3G, it works. You could have taken the phone into the plane, which in this case would have been a private plane, and you would have had your widescreen TV, and because Nokia phone today, not tomorrow, today, can actually plug into the widescreen TV, you could have watched leaning back in that plane. So I recommend that for the next time.
If Nokia buys me the plane, I'll buy the phone. How about that?
Okay. It's a deal. But okay, I need to work a little bit harder. But
I can answer your
we'll
question.
get there. But to the question, I think that's a great question or comment actually about the user centricity. I think the point is that even though it might sound like that we are trying to collect all of this information, it's actually not we. It's something that the technology is enabling that to happen, but what we need to make sure that the user has a controls that you know what information is being shared and where and how. And you can actually, if you want to press the button that shut this down, I want to be actually offline, it's possible. I think it's very important.
It's going to get harder, though.
That's where I might actually differ slightly from Tero, and I do share your concern. At Kickin, we actually focus an awful lot about that. There are a couple of ways to deal with the problem. And by the way, this problem, we could spend hours on it. It really, there are legal issues, there are regulatory issues, there are consumer privacy issues, et cetera. Dave is the chairman of the IAB. There are advertising, monetization issues associated with this. He can talk to at length. But I think there's two ways to think about this. And it also dovetails well with this phone versus computer versus TV system. You have to recognize the following. The reason why the phone is so profound, it's because it's the most powerful edge sensor that exists on planet Earth. It's a sensor. It's the first time we've seen a network push all the way out to the edge where the input-output capabilities of that device is unbelievable. And it's not only input-output about physics, location, what's on the screen, etc., but it's about your behavioral patterns. That is an extreme unlocking of data. That's a data explosion problem. So that's point number one. Point number two, we have not migrated to the phone as yet. We plan on doing that with Nokia towards the end of the year. However, on your PC is also a very powerful edge device. So if you're going to really get user centricity, profiles have to be for the user, by the user, within the user's eminent domain. It's something that we really embrace. So in fact, all this data we're talking about to get you your favorites at Kickin, for example, what we did is a conscious effort to give it to you. We never have it. And what you end up doing is you pull what you need. The problem with the internet today is it's too much push. Imagine if you, the user, were pulling what your favorites are, what your surprises should be, and you were using that for sharing on a user-centric base. That's fundamentally an embracing of technology that we've got to understand. And that's what sensor networks do.
If you pull a surprise, it's not a surprise.
It depends on, if you provide inputs for what would constitute a surprise,
Okay.
that works.
But just, to throw in the inevitable Facebook comment from me, Mark Zuckerberg's vision of where Facebook is going specifically is that there will be a device you carry with you all the time. It will just constantly be sharing for you into some kind of database that they maintain, and it will be, you will somehow control, they hope, making it accessible to your quote-unquote friends.
Absolutely.
But the quantity of data that they're assuming will be going through their system, he's talked about this publicly, exponentially greater than today. And the question from here to there, getting used to this is, there's some serious challenges. And that's why who was it upstairs was saying, is Google going to not do facial recognition? Of course they're going to do it. It's going to be possible. If they don't do it, somebody will do it. You're going to just be holding up a phone, and you'll say, oh, I don't need to know his name. I know everything about him here because I just held it up to his face. That's just happening, But getting from here to there, and every time Facebook, twitches a muscle, people say, no, that's invading my privacy. But this stuff's going to happen anyway.
But David, it's a lot like body scanning. Body scanning wasn't cool until that guy almost blew up the plane in Detroit. So there's a risk-reward ratio. Body scanning was an invasion of privacy. We didn't want that. I certainly don't want that. Look at my body. But until that plane was going to blow up, body scanning became very good because the reward or the value that's being delivered by that underlying capability provides comfort. But it requires responsibility to get from here to there.
Yeah, but
and users have got to be part of that
facial
equation.
recognition, you just can't block that. I mean, that's just going to happen. It's basically here already. There's a lot of those kinds of technologies that you can just trace out where technology is heading, and they're going to be here. And if one company and government doesn't allow them or provide them, another one will, and they're just going to happen. You agree with it?
It's happened already.
Yeah.
I've been to research and development labs that build these systems, and it's happened. Like any government agency that has 3 letters has these systems, and they can scan your retina. They can do 60 people in a second, and and now what they're doing, there's a company that I went to, they're putting it in an Android phone. They're putting this, so you hold up your phone, and you can do banking, you can do whatever you want without having to put a password in or anything.
Because it's reading your retina?
Because it looks at your retina and it says, hey, you're Nick Bilton, and I know what, my phone knows what I am and who I am, and it'll pull up all this information we've been talking about today and do it instantly like that.
How close is that to commercial?
They're talking about, they're going to announce something probably towards the end of the year, I think, show some stuff.
This year, whoa.
Yeah. So.
But I think this is
There's
like a balance.
Okay, we got one more common question, and then we have to wrap up, sorry.
Yeah, so I think you guys...
Identify yourself?
What? Oh, hi. I'm Dennis. I work on Foursquare. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of really everything you guys are talking about, this utopian vision of, I carry this device and, whatever I need to know about whatever contextual situation I'm in, the content just gets delivered to me, right? But at the same time, I've been...
dystopian, but go ahead.
Yeah, whatever. At the same time, I've been trying to build a lot of these things for years, and we put off on building them because we had to replicate another social network, and then Facebook Connect came out, and then it was, the devices aren't smart enough to know where we are, and now everyone has an iPhone. So, from your perspective of everyone sitting on the stage, I'm wondering what are the things on your wish list of what needs to come out in order for all of this stuff to finally happen? Because it seems like once we get one piece of it, it's like, it's the facial recognition. Then we move on to the next thing that we're looking at, and we keep talking about the same ideas, but in the stuff, it doesn't seem to be building itself fast enough. And I'm wondering, what are the wish list pieces that you guys want in order to make a lot of this stuff happen? And it could be sensors, or it could be community, whatever it is. Just interested in hearing that.
Well, I think, one of the major gating factors has been each time there's been a promising piece of enabling technology, which is essentially what we're talking about, it tends to be created for the benefit of the large company that's put in the IP to develop it, right? So we were talking earlier about, wouldn't it be nice if when you went from the Reuters news site to the New York Times site to the next news site, we all shared the record of what you're interested in, but since we've each made significant investments to acquire that, we're relatively unlikely to do it. There have been times when folks like Microsoft have actually said that they would do, if you remember what Passport was, it was essentially federated credentialization so that you could pass across boundaries, but people were a little spooked about it. You know, they'll end up being some Microsoft hook in that, so we better not be dependent on that. People tended to go more an Active Directory way. And I think this is a constant battle. So Facebook Connect is now the way, except people are saying, gee, I'm not sure I want Facebook to have it all. Wouldn't it be nice if Zing or somebody else did it? And you've got those constant waves, unless, and there is now a source, right, you have the Linux public commons approach, which would be another way to essentially share that essential infrastructure on a nobody owns it but everyone gets to use it basis.
I also think as far as like hardware goes, it's really interesting. If you look on Wednesday, there's supposed to be this Apple Moses tablet that's going to be released. And if you look back at the last 30 years, Steve Jobs has tried to put out tablets numerous times before. There's one that was named after one of the seven dwarfs that they worked on with Frog 30 years ago. There was one 20 years ago that was a concept that you can find online. It's this tablet that sits on the table and has a camera that you speak to. And then there was the Newton 10 years ago. And now we're finally getting to this point where this technology is relevant. It's not this. If you look at the Newton and you look at what comes out on Wednesday, there's going to be so much of the exact same technology in there. But the public, I think, can only handle certain shifts in certain different iterations. And then once in a while, you get a technology like the iPhone, which has a tectonic shift that changes everything. And I think that you're starting to see more and more of these things happen at quicker paces. But it's never going to stop. It's just going to continue to go and get thinner and thinner and add more and more features and so on.
We have to wrap up, but I have to say it's interesting. This is the third of 3 panels I've moderated today that sort of ended up talking about privacy. Privacy seems to be the enveloping issue that's kind of coming to the fore in all aspects of this ecosystem. And I think there's a lot of discussions that still have to be had to figure out what to do about it. But thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Onward to partying and dinner.